And even now blue is always here, and even now blue it shines so clear. I don't need a prayer or even words to say. No matter what I do, I'll never reach your can't. Colors of summer are streams on my heart, and rolling like down from my cheeks is the sound of love to start. The words I have for you are stuck, it just feels like a curse that I can't contain. Will the two of us meet again? I wish I told you back then. My hands will feel what to let us talk about the this galaxy so fast about me.
Hello YouTube, it is I, TDI Fan 2024, and in this video, I'll be talking about the 3 films So, just a couple of hours before this video officially is released on YouTube, I just barely finished part 3 of this trilogy, Back to the Future. Now, I'm guessing many of you guys, and when I say many, I mean many of you, most likely know or at least have heard of Back to the Future. It's a series that pretty much a lot of people, especially in the US, should know, because this series is what many would consider to be a cult classic, especially as one of the greatest film trilogies, since there's only 3 films and there hasn't been another project related to this series ever since. I mean, I heard there was like a game and an animated series, but like every franchise pretty much gets one of those. So that's nothing new or special. But for films, we haven't gotten a single Back to the Future related film, like not a reboot, not a 4th film, nothing. Like once this trilogy was over, that was pretty much it. And that's what honestly makes this trilogy really special, because nowadays, all we pretty much see is reboots, spin-offs, sequels, and most of them are very unnecessary or are just utterly bland slash garbage even, that you can tell that the studios behind it only made it just for the sake of making some money and not for the series or the film itself. Although there are a couple of films that are the complete opposite and are actually made to satisfy the fans, but these days in Hollywood, most movies are just cash grabs, and they are not hard to see why, or it's not hard to see which is which, like which is a cash grab and which is a film that you can tell that people behind it actually put the time and effort. But Back to the Future is different. This trilogy started all the way back in the 80s. Yes, we love the 80s because the 80s and 90s are what truly, like we were truly blessed with some great great moments, great films, great media from those times. And this series is no different, Back to the Future. And in this video, I feel like I want to just give a full review on this entire trilogy, because why not? This trilogy is definitely, hands down, one of the best film trilogies of all time, because one, each film is great in their own right. There's not a single bad film in this trilogy, and that's great, because in a lot of trilogies, there are many films that people would see as the diamond in the rough. There could be like 2 films that are great and 1 that's not. For example, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, although me personally, I love all 3 films, there are many people that would consider 2 of them to be great and 1 not. Wink, wink, Spider-Man 3. And of course, we all got opinions, and I can see why people do not like Spider-Man 3, but there are a lot of people who honestly would consider that movie to be bad, and that's why there's a lot of film franchises that would usually have great films and 1 film that is either just very unnecessary, and if it never existed, nothing would change, or it's just completely bad, and you can tell that the people who made that film did not care at all, or the studios for the most part. But that is not the case for this trilogy, because each film, you can tell that they put the time and effort to make each film great on its own right. Like, none of these films need to be compared to like on a pedestal with each other, because each film can be loved and for its own reason. Like, for example, like the part 2 and part 3. Of course, if I had to rank the films, part 2 and part 3 would definitely not be on the same level as part 1, but I think most people would agree with that. based on, if you've seen the films, you pretty much know. But other than that, like, each film could still be enjoyed and could still be considered as a classic slash great film and adventure. And that's what's great about this trilogy. Like, there's not really anything that you can say that's fully bad about these films. Although two of them, I would even say, has a few issues, like a few problems or a few plot holes and stuff like that. But they are still very enjoyable. Just because a film's got a few problems doesn't mean that it won't be a great film. There are many great films that still have issues that but are still considered to be great films, like masterpieces even. And yeah, like, that just goes to show that a movie does not have to be perfect to be a masterpiece film. But that could also be argued, and that's completely fine. Now, back to the topic at hand, Back to the Future. This film series is, as I've already said before, a great film series. Each film can be considered as a top 10 film, like 10 out of 10. I wouldn't go that far, at least with part 2 and part 3, but I already see, like, out there in the media, I already see how beloved each film are, or each of these films are. And it's great, honestly, because, like, you don't really see that with a lot of franchises. There are a lot of film franchises that have more than one film. Some, like one at least, would be considered as a great film, and then there could be another that is just the full, like, opposite, and many would consider it to be not great, like Avengers and Toy Story and Jurassic Park and stuff like that. But for this series, I don't see anybody that full on says that any of these films are bad. Like, sure, some of these films might have a few issues, or if you compare it to another film from the series that is, like, way great and way beyond the other film, you can still say that it's great. Or many people would not even say that any are, like, bad, to the point where if you include it when it comes to like a conversation, then people will just say, oh yeah, the series itself is not great because of this film. All three films are great and beloved, and that is very rare to see nowadays with a lot of movie franchises. So that is one great thing about this series. But, like, film things aside, let's talk about the actual film itself. Let's go with the first film, Back to the Future Part 1. For me, it's definitely my personal favorite of the three, and I'm pretty sure many people would consider the first film to be the greatest film, and it's not hard to see why. The first film is just perfect, honestly. It's one of those few films that you would consider to be perfect. Like, everything about the film is just great. When I first saw it a couple of weeks ago, when I first saw the film, I was honestly blown away. Sure, if you compare it to, like, a film that's, like, relatable or has a close story, it has, like, close, I don't know, that's pretty similar to this film. Like, if you compare it to a film that's, like, the same but not really, that released, like, now, you can, like, already see some cliche moments that has appeared in this film. But this film did come out, like, over 30 years ago, so you can legit just look past that and you can still enjoy this film. And this film is full on 80s. All three of these films are honestly full on 80s, but I think the first two are way more, since the third one takes place in the Wild West, most of the time. But I will talk about those two films after the first film. Honestly, what's not to love about the first film? The cast is great. Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, all three of them do fantastic in this film. And the story, although is now being told many times in different ways in other franchises, this story still is great and it holds up for sure. Like, this, of course, the story of traveling back in time and messing with some things or fixing some things to make the future better or worse, or to make the future not change at all. So, like, those types of plot points are, of course, told many, many times now. But in this film, they really are great. Like, even though it's very, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Even though the film, like, you can pretty much expect what's going to happen throughout the film, pretty much. But it's still very enjoyable, at least for a first watch. When I rewatch it eventually, I think I'll still like it just as much because the first film is honestly one of my favorite films that I've ever watched, honestly. And I watch a lot of films, so that's saying something. And honestly, like the feeling I got watching the first film is just one feeling that I love about watching movies. There are very few movies where it gives me a feeling, a sensation that I honestly just adore. And this film did that. So that's why this film gets extra points for me. And honestly, I don't think any other like time travel film could pass this film. Back to the Future is honestly probably the best time travel movie out there, and I don't know if any other movie will come close. But I mean, it's Back to the Future. What's not to like? And I think many people would consider that to be the best time travel film, the best sci-fi related film. Well, maybe that's a stretch for sci-fi, but for time travel, it's honestly one of the greatest time travel films. And it holds up to this day. It's already been 30 years, over 30 years, and the movie still holds up. And even the CGI in this film, like with the flying car at the very end, it's honestly great. The CGI, although of course it's a little wonky since it's been 30 years since they made that, but it's like some people would even say that it can still hold up to like some other CGI stuff that happens in now, like in projects that show up now, because yeah, like you can tell that they actually went all out and put the effort in for the CGI in this film compared to other films now where you can tell that they didn't really try based on budgets or other things that can cause them to just not, be fully focused. But other than that, this film is just great. The characters are great. Marty McFly and Doc Brown are like two of the most iconic film characters, or some of the most iconic film characters, and their dynamic is just great, especially in this film. Seeing Marty talk to this alternate version of Doc, or it's not an alternate version, but it's Doc from the past, and it's great. I just love the entire story of Marty trying to get back to the future, and it's just a really great film. I just love it a lot, and I'm glad I watched it. And if I had to rate it out of 10, of course I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. And now, I think that's it for the first film. As for the other two films, I will just talk about them at the same time because why not? They're kind of the same. If you haven't noticed, or if you don't know about this yet, both films were filmed back to back. And if you know when they were released, it makes sense. Part 2 was released in 1989, while Part 3 was released a year later in 1990. So yeah, you can tell that they filmed both films back to back. And if you watch the movies, you can already tell based on how they look. They look the exact same pretty much in both films. So you're like, oh, they must have filmed these two really close to each other. And that's honestly a great thing. I know movies do that nowadays, but seeing that here was great. And I guarantee you, I bet fans who saw the second film in theaters were anticipating and were really hyped for the third film, although they had to wait a year. I guarantee you they were like super excited and super pumped up, and were honestly just having a blast with these two films. And that's honestly why I wish I was born in the like late 70s or something, so that I can be there to relive those times, and that would be awesome. But when it comes to the story in these two films, I will have to say that they aren't as great compared to the first film. Like Part 2, I think I have a bit more issues with Part 2, although overall as a film, I prefer Part 2 compared to Part 3. But when it comes to the problems I think I have more problems with Part 2, just because the film, like, it kind of like interprets that it was going to be taking place in the future, which at the beginning for a few moments, or for a moment, yes, it was. But then they were only in the future for like 15, 20, 30 minutes. After that, they just went back in time to the event that we've already seen in the first film, just different because now we have a new Marty / Doc that is also in the past trying to change something so that the new future will not be as dark. But that's one thing that's great about this film, actually, because Part 2 is definitely the darkest film of the three, because we get to see this alternate timeline where the main antagonist, Biff, is now like the ruler of the world based on some events that happened in the future, in Marty's future. And honestly, it's just like this film pretty much bluntly shows you the consequences of altering time. And it's honestly scary. Like, imagine if you have to go through that. That'd be crazy and scary and stuff like that. It's awful. But the film itself is really good. The CGI definitely upgraded because this film came out 4 years after the first film. So technology, of course, got better over that time. But still, overall, when it comes to the story, this film has a weaker story. But all three films in their own right have great stories. But when it comes to, like, if I had to, of course, compare them, I think the first film still has, like, the better story. But that's just me. And part two can still be enjoyed because I still had a fun time with the film. It's just that I had a few issues. And that's why if I had to rate it out of 10, I'd give it a 9. But a 9 is still a great score for this film. And for part three, I kind of have the same issues. Like, I wasn't really into the Wild West setting, although it was different and something that we've never seen in the first two films. So I'm guessing a lot of people probably liked that part of the third film. Me, I wasn't really into it. All the Wild West stuff that was going on, I was just, like, it was fun. I still enjoyed it, but I overall, like, if I had to choose which film to watch out of the three, I would most likely choose the first or the second rather than the third film. But it's still a great film, and the new characters we get are great as well. But I also have a lot of concerns with the third film, like all of the characters that we see in the first two films, like Marty's family and Biff. Well, Biff is in the third film, but he's playing like his like great grandfather or something. And yeah, but like the actual characters that we see in the first two films, like they are not in this film at all. Well, they are, but they're barely in it, like only in the beginning and end. Like what's her name? Jennifer, the love interest for Marty. She only shows up at the very end of part three. While in part two, she did have a bigger role, and I liked that, honestly. But in part three, these characters were pretty much just sidelined, and I didn't really like that. But that's just the one issue I have. And for part two, my main issue was that I really wish the entire film was just focused in the future, because seeing them go to the future was honestly great, even though, of course, they went to the year 2015. And for us who were alive and well in 2015, we know that that future is the exact opposite of what 2015 really was. But of course, this is just a film, so, it makes sense. And I just honestly wished that the entire film took place in the future. That would have been awesome. It would have been awesome to see them fix the problems that Marty and Jennifer go through in the future. But that just gets resolved in like 5 minutes. And then after that, they have to go back to the past to fix something else. And that was honestly my major issue with part two. And for part three, my major issue was just the characters were sidelined, and I was honestly not really caring for the Wild West setting of the trilogy. But it's still overall a great film. And what part three did great, and honestly my favorite thing about part three, other than the ending, of course, like the ending is great. Like, what a way to end this great trilogy. But I loved how they gave Doc Brown. They pretty much gave him like a main role. Like, and throughout all three films, I think you can argue that Marty is the main protagonist of this trilogy. But in part three, I felt like Doc was honestly the protagonist. Like, they gave Doc a lot more to do compared to the first and second film. He had a love interest in this film, and he had a lot going for him. And honestly, like, there was a lot of moments where like it was really emotional with Doc and Marty, because there were times when you're like, oh crap, Doc will probably stay here, and him and Marty are just gonna have to say goodbye to each other. And it's like, seeing these two really work well with each other for 3 films, it would honestly be hard to see them say goodbye and stuff. And in the end, it almost felt like that, until if you saw part 3, you know what happens. And yeah, honestly, it's just a great ending to an amazing trilogy. And yeah, it's just great. And if I had to rate part 3 out of 10, I would also give it a 9 because, like I said, there were some issues I had with the film, but that's pretty much it. If I had to rate all 3 films out of, like, if I had to rate them from worst to best, I would say third place would go to part 3 because out of the 3 films, I think I enjoyed part 2 and, of course, part 1 a lot more compared to part 3. And second place would go to part 2 only because of those issues I have. And first place would definitely go to part 1 because that movie is just simply perfect. To put it simply, that film is perfect. And if you haven't seen Back to the Future, you should definitely watch it whenever you get the chance because these films are honestly great. Some of the best films to ever be made because these films, like, you can tell people had fun with these films and they're just over the top when it comes to wackiness and future realistic things. It's just great. This entire trilogy is great. And none of the films are bad at all. They're all great films. And the first one is even greater, in my opinion. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on this trilogy. I'm so glad I took the time to watch all these 3 films. And yeah, Back to the Future. This trilogy is just one that I will not forget and that I will be coming back to from the years to come. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to end things here. For those of you guys who watched Back to the Future, what are your thoughts on the trilogy? Which one's your favorite? Which one's your least favorite? Who's your favorite character? And just overall, what's your thoughts on these films? And with that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and stay tuned for the next video. Peace.